All right, enough small talk between Matthew Fairburn and I here following the Sabres 4-2 loss to the Montreal Canadiens tonight down at KeyBank Center. The Baker Fairburn Hockey Show is live March 1st. March has arrived, and the Sabres are still in last place in the NHL's Eastern Conference. Good evening, everyone. I am your co-host, Kris Baker. You can find me on X Sabres Prospects, and with me, as always, on location at KeyBank Center, as previously mentioned, your Sabres writer for The Athletic. That is Matthew Fairburn in his prep school uniform tonight. Looking good, Matthew, as always. Thanks for hopping in. We were relatively on time tonight. Numbers are starting to build already for this live broadcast. We appreciate everyone hopping in. We'll get the formalities out of the way as always. On your way in to YouTube, if you could please like this video. Matthew told you a couple episodes ago that I get angry when we don't get the requisite amount of likes. That is an accurate statement. So if you could please hit that thumbs up button, you'll make me happy, and I'll go to bed very happy. Hit the subscribe button as well so you know when Matthew and I go live. You can hit that notification bell. That'll really be the way that you can know when we go live. You can find the Baker Fairburn Hockey Show on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. You could please leave a 5-star review. I am sending this out to Twitter tonight. If you're watching on Twitter, hop on over to YouTube. The chat is filling up. You can argue with your peers, your fellow fans. You can voice your frustration. We got the trade deadline coming up. We got some anonymous player and agent polls recently conducted by The Athletic. And part of Matthew's work, and you can find everything that he does at theathletic.com/Sabres. Earlier this week, I think just a couple days ago, Matthew put out a post looking for your feedback. The Sabres fan survey is out. If you haven't filled that out yet, it's a quick and easy form, Google form. You got to sign in to do it, but get in there. Send your feedback in about the current state of the Sabres franchise. I think that helps Matthew kind of gather up information and properly represent the fan base's opinion on a lot of things. So with that said, Sabres had a game tonight. They lost 4-2 on home ice to the Montreal Canadiens. Alex Tuch got his 22nd goal. Jiri Kulich cashed his 12th with an absolute laser. Nice pass from Dahlin. Nice shot. We've seen that from Kulich. And UPL, I believe it was 25 of 28 that he stopped tonight. I, for some reason, closed my show sheet, but I have a memory. Sabres went 11-7 tonight, Matthew. Kind of an interesting scratch list, I think. I mean, I don't know, somewhat to be expected. We've seen some of the names on there. Sam Lafferty, obviously, we know he's been scratched fairly regularly of late. One of the big free agent acquisitions really hasn't come to be. We'll get into that, I'm sure, as we go here and fill out the show schedule for the rest of the year. But yeah, 7-11 tonight. Sam Lafferty out, Jason Zucker out, and Henri Jokijarju were your scratches. And I think, the Jokijarju one was kind of interesting. But just thoughts on the game tonight, Matthew? Thoughts on the scratches? Thoughts on really the past two games? I missed the Carolina game. I was traveling on business in Nashville. Broadway got me, man. Oof. Flew home with a little bit of a hangover. Flew home with a little bit of a hangover. But
Cantor said Kris sounds sick, and I think it's just the Broadway flu there.
No, I don't. I'm not sick at all. This is how I sounded yesterday, and Cantor, I actually thought I sounded pretty good today. But yeah, maybe still a little hoarse. Well, you're in these bars too. You're in these rooftop bars and the music's going and like you're yelling at the person that's 2 feet from you. And I'm sure it was just that. It was nothing else. But yeah, anyways, Matthew, game tonight, thoughts on maybe what we saw in the Carolina game, just kind of where we at here, because we got a lot of things to talk about. I don't think we want to focus on the game, but it's fresh in our minds. Let's just get to that right now.
Yeah, I would say the last two games have been kind of a sobering snap back to reality for this team. They played some good hockey leading into that Thursday game against Carolina. I think they'd won 6 of 7. They came out of the break with 2 wins, playing pretty well. Even caught some people wondering about their playoff odds, which seemed insane to me. But I think these two games have snapped everybody right back into the same place heading into the deadline, that this is a last place team, one that should be in the position of a seller, if not, having a fire sale, but at least be in the position of a seller where you're looking at your unrestricted free agents, gauging whether you can get contracts done or whether those guys need to be moved, which is why, Henri Jokijarju being a scratch tonight was relevant. I don't know that it was so relevant to the trade deadline because he's been scratched before, right? He's been in and out of the lineup. It seemed like a quick hook to me, for a guy that played well at the Four Nations, a guy that was playing well in the first two games coming out of the break, didn't have a great night against Carolina, but that's true of a lot of Sabres. Zucker is interesting to me, this injury situation that's kind of lingering for him. He blocked a shot against the Rangers, played against the Ducks, but didn't play his usual workload, wasn't quite himself, hasn't skated with the team since. And Lindy Ruff said, I asked him today whether this was something they're being extra cautious with because of the trade deadline. He said it didn't really have anything to do with being cautious. He thought he might have him against Carolina and that, it wasn't something that the injury took a turn that maybe he and, the team and Zucker both weren't anticipating. So whatever is happening there, Zucker's value is kind of in flux right now. I would assume that it's been communicated around the league what he's kind of dealing with, at least if his agent, has maybe circulated that to teams, but not great to have that happen, a few days before the deadline, which is why we had kind of talked a lot about getting that deal done or moving on, right, and figuring it out. And this is part of the reason why. But the other, while we're on the topic of the pending unrestricted free agents, and we're still sort of on the topic of the game, Jordan Greenway. I mean, he just has looked great coming out of the break. And we wondered if this amount of time would be enough runway for him to boost his value before the deadline. And I think it very much has been 4 games in. And he's looked like the type of guy you would want on your team if you're a playoff contender. So I spoke with him this morning. I'll have, some of those comments in a story later tonight, early Sunday morning. But a guy that's still willing to sign here, still willing to play here long term, but is kind of, it's out of his hands the way he looks at it. He's kind of leaving it to his agent, and he's not going to play, not playing for free, right? These guys are, they need deals that make sense, and the clock is ticking on that one. So we are 6 days away from the trade deadline. Things are getting real for this team, and I think the last 2 games underscore that the idea of, playing a 700 points percentage or winning 19 of your last 25 games, whatever the hell they need to do, it doesn't look like that's a realistic outcome for this group.
Yeah, the Sabres tonight. So with the loss, they're 24, 29, and 5 on the year. 24 games left, I believe. And it's like, unless they go 20 and 4, you know what I mean? Or pick up basically 40 points. I think they have 53 points right now. They're essentially toast, right? I mean, let's just start to get the shovel out, and there's a pile of dirt that you can start putting in that hole where they're laying right now in last place in the Eastern Conference. Some thoughts on those guys, though, that you mentioned. Jokijarju, I think we start with him. I think it was peculiar that he was scratched. They went 7D. They put Gilbert and Bryson in. Jokiharju's been playing well. I think this was related to the trade deadline. No doubt about it, because it's such a no-brainer. Like, he's not nursing anything, right?
He's not, and he'd probably done enough in those few games and in the Four Nations to kind of solidify who he is as a player. I get that you want to get Clifton and Bryson some action. I get keeping Gilbert in because of the nature of the game that it turned out to be, a little chippy. The Canadiens have a few players that are willing to mix it up, and so you want to keep Gilbert in the lineup. But I don't know. I mean, it's not a secret at this point either that Henri Jokijarju would be available, right? And that I don't know what level of interest they'll get in him and what return they will get, but they don't want to screw that up for the player or for themselves by having him get hurt, And so I guess we'll find out how trade related it is, Monday and Tuesday. If he's a prolonged absence from the lineup, I don't know how how you can kind of spin that as anything other than the trade deadline, right? It's I know he's been scratched before, so it's not completely out of left field, but it's like Eric Johnson had a, seemingly never-ending illness last year, and the cure was a cheesesteak, because when he got traded to Philadelphia, he was right back out there and he was good to go. So
Yeah.
I do actually kind of appreciate the teams that are just like, yeah, we're sitting them because of the trade deadline. But Jokijarju is an interesting one. I think he helped himself and the Sabres in the last couple of weeks, the way he played. It's not going to dramatically change anything, but it's, it should at least get them a couple offers they can work with.
And it's worth pointing out, we saw some deals today. I think we saw 2 today. Teams are talking to each other. They're making deals. So tick-tock, right? We titled the last episode of this podcast a week ago, Adam's on the clock, and he's still on the clock. And other teams are starting to move. So, something's going to break there, I think, with Jokijarju. On Greenway, you mentioned that coming back from his injury, he's kind of boosted his value. He's boosted his value league-wide. He certainly has boosted his value to the Buffalo Sabres. And I think he's the priority right now over Zucker, even, in a way. I know Zucker's, more offensively minded with this team. He's had a surprising season. I just think the impacts of Jordan Greenway are infectious in the lineup. Very similar to Zucker, just in a different way with the physicality. I love Greenway's attitude tonight after the game when he was meeting with the press, and he was kind of mentioning, because the Sabres play Montreal again on Monday in Montreal. And he had that little wrestling match with Arbor Jacki. He had some other stuff going on with Dobish, saying he was talking some ridiculousness. And I just want to let him know, hey, we're coming back. We play you guys again on Monday, and we're going to be coming. You haven't heard that a lot from players from the Sabres this year. And I understand they lost the game, and it's like, whatever, right? But I don't know. When we were talking about Greenway last week, I think there's mixed emotions with the fan base because, term, dollars, everything else. Like, I don't think that, like, his value today is pretty much what his value is going to be, I think, a month from now, especially if he stays in Buffalo, right? He's not going to get this extra boost or whatever. The one caveat is if you move him and he has a really good playoff season. And I know that, I think this is kind of where your head is at, right? With Greenway, that's how he can put an exponential boost to whatever his AAV is moving forward. But
same with Zucker, frankly.
Yes, for sure.
You're not going to boost your value by scoring, 10 goals in your final 20 games for Buffalo, but you can boost your value by being a big, useful presence in a
role
playoff
player, especially. Yes. Both of those guys would be role players, and they could be very effective role players. The one thing about Greenway that I think there's some chatter with fans is you'll hear it sometimes oh, he can't stay healthy and this and that. You know what? For Greenway on the right dollar and term deal, with the Sabres being a young team, I mentioned this to you, I think, over the weekend, but we have to say it here. I personally would take Jordan Greenway for 65 or 68 games a season if it means that you can slow cook some of your prospects and not have to force young guys in the lineup and continue to be the youngest team in the league on a regular basis. If Greenway's going to be out 15 games a year, whatever the number is, you can bring a guy like Noah Ostlund up at some point and Anton Wahlberg and give them small tastes and kind of bridge their, journey to the NHL in smaller chunks instead of forcing guys up. And I know that's not the best way to do it, but if it comes to that, and if Jordan Greenway's the way that he plays, kind of like Samuelson, he's going to miss games, but there's still value when you can have them in. And there's this bigger asset management value, I think, that happens with Greenway. So I know people don't get the love with Greenway because of the offensive statistics. I look at his hits, his forechecking, his penalty kill, net front presence. He's kind of unique still in the Sabres ecosystem. So
game like tonight's a great example of it.
Got to get him signed, man.
I'm with you that I think I prioritize him over Zucker because of age and because of overall two-way. I think you can find another Zucker, right? And I think Greenway's can be a little bit harder to find. Players like him when he's at his best, when he's healthy. Zucker, they're close, right? They're both useful role players on a good team. Right now, they're in elevated roles, really. Their presence is really important to such a young team, lacking leadership, lacking team toughness. But Greenway's age makes me think that is a situation you would want to prioritize more. And, the deadline, to an extent, the NHL trade deadline is the deadline to get a contract done. I mean, you get beyond that point, it gets really tricky because those guys are that much closer to free agency. You could still get the deal done, but at that point, you've missed your window to get an asset. You haven't given yourself a fallback option. It's what happened to them with Linus Ullmark, right? A couple years back. So you see it happen, around the league from time to time. But these are two guys that you might not get premium assets back, but you're going to get pretty good assets back if you can't come to some sort of agreement. And at this point, 6 days away from the trade deadline, you should have a pretty damn good idea how close you are with those guys, right? Like how realistic it is to get the contract done. That's your job as a general manager, is to gauge those things, weigh where you're at, get a feel for it, and understand. Frankly, should have been done a long time ago.
Yep.
Like the lack of being proactive in this situation with Zucker, with Greenway, gets you to this point where it reminds me of the conversation we had in the summer of all the things they had to do in the summer, right? All the things that were on the to-do list, the wish list for fans, these different needs they needed. You made your job a lot harder by not starting it an off season or two before. And in this case, it's more of a micro situation, but still none of the contracts are done, right? None. At the beginning of the year, there was talk about saving the cap space because of all the next wave of players that needed to be signed. And none of them are under contract, including a couple of UFAs who have, become pretty important. And all of the RFAs who, Bo Byram is having a pretty good year. Peterka is going to need a contract, and we'll get to him. Quinn, I get, is having a down year, so that one you can put aside. Certainly don't need to save much money for him, that's for sure. And then Ryan McLeod, who's having a good year. Like, none of these situations have been handled. In addition to no outside additions to the roster in season when you had a 13-game winless streak. So we'll see what this week brings before, sort of the ultimate judgment comes on Kevin Adams and the job he's done this season with, all these situations. But a whole lot of nothing so far.
So I wish we knew why they weren't signed by now. Zucker's conversation started when the Sabres were out west, I think in January, shortly after the new year. That sounds right? So they've had a little bit of runway there to kind of go back and forth. And I think that his number is pretty simple. His term is going to be pretty simple. It's going to be a 1-year deal or a 2-year deal. He makes what, 5? Does he make 5 or 5.5? 5?
Makes 5.
His bump, he's not going to be a $6 million player, I don't think, even with the cap going up. I mean, let's face it. So you give him a bump, offer it to him. Like, what's going on? This one seems simple. Greenway?
I mean, I think you could go, 1 year, 5.75 or 6, and go 2 years, 5.5. Those are your options.
Yeah.
Which one do you like? And go from there. And if he thinks he can get more than that, or if he's not interested in playing here and wants to go to a contender and chase a cup and boost his value more, right? Like, that's a win-win for Jason Zucker. Is he gets traded to a contender, he plays well in the playoffs, he makes more in free agency. Maybe he does get 6 from a different team besides Buffalo. And he said a lot of the right things about wanting to be here, about being open to it. And maybe he would have been open to it, or more open to it. Maybe it gets done. Who the hell knows? But at this point, when you're 6 days away from the deadline and he's not in the lineup, you wonder what's going to happen. And I'm not really of the mindset that you have to, as people know, if they've listened to the show, doing right by Jason Zucker, I don't think is very important in this situation at all. But doing right by the Sabres is important. So if you need to get an asset, you go get one, because Greenway's, I don't know, Zucker and Greenway are probably similar return. I think Greenway may be a little bit more valuable now that he's healthy and he's younger. Who knows? But they're in that similar bucket of, second late second, third round pick kind of range, most likely. Just feels like there just hasn't been any urgency at this point. You're leaving it to the 11th hour, and that's really putting you in a bind, putting you in a tight spot to have to, figure this out in the next few days. And I don't know. We'll see how that ends, I guess, because those are the pressing situations, right? Those two and Jokijarju are the business that needs to get done. I don't think Bryson is necessarily, a guy that needs to be moved. I don't know if anybody wants James Reimer. These are the other UFAs. Dennis Gilbert, I think, is worth more to you than he's worth on the market. So you're talking Jokijarju, Greenway, Zucker is the business that needs to be handled. Everything else, Dylan Cousins, Alex Tuck, JJ Peterka, Owen Power, Bo Byram, all these, different names you see on the trade boards or names you see in trade rumors, guys that they're getting calls on, whatever it is, that doesn't need to happen by Friday.
Right.
I would almost say it shouldn't happen by Friday. Like, I don't think you're going to get the right deal if you rush into one of those trades. So, especially because, I don't know, maybe a situation like Byram for Middlestat pops up. Those are not super common in season because a contender that's going to want one of these guys is not going to necessarily want to give you win now pieces, and that's what the Sabres need. So those situations we can talk about, but I don't view them as particularly pressing this week.
Where I'm at right now on Greenway and Zucker is if you can't sign them this week, I'm not going to feel the pressure to trade them. I'm going to hold them and still try to sign them because of their importance to the team. Jokijarju, definitely moving. I don't know what's taken so damn long to move Jokijarju, by the way, and I'm not trying to push him out of town by any means, but it's like he's been scratched. His importance to the team was kind of, he's steady. He's played up the lineup in the past couple of years, but he's a right shot guy. But like they've been imbalanced on the blue line so many times that they've sat him out anyway. So like, what's the point? Like, what's taken so long with Jokijarju to move him out? Maybe it's the market. I don't know. There's things that we don't always know, right? Question for the chat, though, and question for Matthew Fairburn. Forget about like the term and everything else for a second, but just on a 2-year deal. Okay. So you're looking at Greenway and Zucker, because I do think Greenway will get more than 2 years, by the way. Okay. But for 2 years, and if you could only choose one, would you take Greenway for 2 years at $4 million AAV or Zucker at 2 years at 5.5? You can only choose one. I think you kind of already answered it. But
I think Greenway. I would take Greenway.
Okay.
I would take Greenway because you've got the age factor. You've got, I like how he fits in with the core of the group as a leader and as a guy that he feels really bought in to me, to what's going on here. And I do think he brings a little something different to the lineup than Zucker does. So, you're giving me $1.5 million savings and a player that I think I would rather have anyways. Offense should not be their main problem, right? It should not be. And I know Zucker brings more than that. And he brings a lot of those leadership traits and, some of the two-way play and things like that. But Greenway, I think, is just a heavier, tougher player and still growing into that even, in this later stage of his career, like really feels like he's taking ownership of who he is as a player in the role that he plays. So Zucker, the wheels could fall off in year 2 of that deal. And, if he's not in that top line role, he's probably not producing the type of points he's got, right? He's been boosted by the power play a little bit here. So to me, the age might be the big thing too, is just the fear of, what's coming around the bend when a guy's, just turned 33.
I think mine is also Greenway, but I think it's a compelling question. Because Zucker's shown a lot of value, like I said, in a different way this year with this young team. So thought that was kind of interesting. What do you got cooking here?
I think this is a good chat here from Grieg. Is that did I pronounce that
Yep.
right? He said, I'd prefer to sign Zucker, but if he goes, then I want to see us retain salary. Most other teams in the league use cap space as an asset. Why can't we? It's a good point that if they retain half of that salary, then maybe they do get a different type of return. $2.5 million for Jason Zucker. I think it's going to be it's a relevant talking point because they very rarely have retained salary, despite having a massive amount of cap space year
They
over
haven't
year over year.
weaponized cap space really at all,
Only to get to the floor, right? Like they did the
pick up Ben
Ben
Bishop.
Bishop thing,
Yeah.
right? And other than that, they have not used it to their advantage. Like so many wasted opportunities over, the last handful of years to do that and to do other things with the cap space. It's probably the most pressing point of frustration, I think, for the fan base is, and I think a very real one and something that they should be frustrated with. So not even just specific to retention, just using the money somehow, right? Being one of those teams that spends to the cap and is willing to put every resource into putting the most competitive hockey team on the ice. You should be able to do that with Zucker, right? Like if you're not liking the offers you're getting and you can get a higher draft pick by eating $2.5 million, that is what you should be doing. But we'll see.
Nashville retained salary today. I think they retained 50% of Nyquist and got a second in that deal with Minnesota. So, I mean, another example of kind of getting creative to squeeze a better asset out. Maybe that kind of sets a market on Zucker if they're considering moving him.
M. Spaz says, why are Greenway and Zucker so valuable? They're on a last place team. If they're not here next year, how worse will they be? Well, like you're trying to replace those guys, right? And if you're replacing them with Isak Roseanne and Tyson Kozak, or, who else would be in line from Rochester to potentially take full-time jobs, right? Or, a free look, put it this way. They hit on Zucker, right? And I would say hit on the Greenway trade to an extent, right? They gave up a good amount to get him. He's been banged up. He hasn't been perfect, but they brought in a decent player. And M. Spaz followed up his comment here by saying, get other veterans, which is what you would have to do, right? Well, look at the other veterans that they've brought in. Sam Lafferty.
Well, that's where I was going with this. Yeah.
Nicholas Aube-Kubel is in Rochester. Beck Malmsteen's been a fine, player.
You had to do that. Yeah, you had to do that. Mallenstein. Go ahead. Matthew knows his name. He's just trying to
try to get a rise out of Kris there. Mallenstein's been good, but he's a fourth line guy, not getting a lot of ice time. Even go back. I mean, look at Eric Johnson, Connor Clifton. I'm trying to think of some of the other. I mean, there haven't been a tremendous amount of veterans added to this roster, but point being, the batting average is not great. And so you got two in-house that are pretty decent, that are doing a good job filling roles for you, that I would not say, you could, that's not really, I guess, the logic I would be using to build the roster. It's like, okay, the team's in last place, so what? Nobody's important, right? Theoretically, you're in last place. What's the point of re-signing JJ Peterka, right? You follow that logic down the wrong train. You can make a case against anybody on the roster. So I get where people are coming from, because if you do bring them back, it's a very similar looking forward group. I think the problem with the group does not lie with the players like Zucker and Greenway. I think you're looking more at changing up the composition of the group by, Cousins, Quinn, Peterka. You're going to get calls on those guys. Is there an offer out there where you can mix up your group? That. And I'm not saying you have to bring back Zucker and Greenway at all costs, but, they're reasonably priced players who fill their roles pretty well. And you're just making things harder on yourself in the offseason if you let them walk.
So My answer to that is very similar. I think that if you hit on your fourth line acquisitions that you made in the offseason, Greenway, you have a little more wiggle room to, move a Greenway, or he's maybe less important to the roster. So I don't need to rehash what you just said. Full agreement there. There's also the perception of the Sabres franchise league wide with the agents' comments, and we'll get to that in a little bit here. And some of the other things with the anonymous player poll, which makes it harder to pull in those veterans that everyone wants to go out and get, right? We
But
all in agreement.
It's easy if you're Florida to be like, these veterans can leave and we'll go get the next two that want to come play. I mean, even if you're Boston, if you're, if you're Minnesota, if you're a contending team, Minnesota's not even that good. I mean, they're good this year, but they're not like some perennial cup contender, but they're good enough and they can feel pretty confident that they'll go find some veterans via trade or via free agency. I would say that given the GM's track record and the team's reputation, it's not a simple deal to just go get guys that are going to be as good as Zucker and Greenway in those roles. So, you brought up the polls, and it's probably the best possible look you can get at some unfiltered opinions on the situation. And the agents had Buffalo as the worst run franchise in the league, right? 6 of the 19 agents had them number 1 on their list. That was James Myrtle and Michael Russo, polled 19 agents on a variety of topics. Terry Pegula was I think second among on the question of who's the worst owner, right?
Yeah, and this wasn't like a MVP vote. Like the agents would give one answer,
right,
which is important to note. But yeah, let's go back to the question for the agents was posed as, which is the most unstable or poorly run franchise? Again, 19 agents responded. Buffalo got 6 of the votes. Like that was the first team out of 6 of the 19 agents' mouth. And there were some comments that were offered in there too. He said Buffalo is just decades. One of the 6 said Buffalo has just decades of mediocrity and is just a mess. Like that's a pretty straight shot across the bow. Okay. Now these agents represent players that people, so again, let's bring it back to Greenway and Zucker. It's like you have guys here that are, I would call them critical elements to the team, at least as it's presently constructed. And the job gets harder if you just let them go. Right. To the other question for the agents where Buffalo was kind of relevant, you already kind of touched upon it. Who is the worst owner in the league? So Tom Dundon from Carolina was first with 10 of the 19 votes, but Terry Pegula was 5th. He got 5 votes. And the commentary on Pegula, though, was kind of different. The comments were focused more on a perceived lack of involvement and a lack of on-ice success. One agent said that Buffalo has swung and missed a lot. And that's true. We don't need to rehash recent history. We've all lived through it here. Everyone in the chat has the scar tissue that we talk about from the Pegula era. Another agent said that he has not done anything. He's in left field, which almost kind of conflicts with, I think, a lot of what fans think about Terry Pegula. Because when Jason Botterill was jettisoned and Kevin Adams was brought in, there was that comment where Pegula said we weren't being heard or we weren't felt heard, which maybe I think implied that he was like almost like Jerry Jones-ish. Maybe that's too far. But what the agents are saying is just like, no, he's out there and he's got this inexperienced GM kind of running the show. And it's put his franchise in a really bad spot.
Yeah. I mean,
right?
And then you have that's kind of like a big picture over the top view. And then you have like the on the ground from the players, right? Where we had 111 players, I think, in our anonymous player poll.
And the responses were varied. Like some questions weren't all 100 plus.
Okay. So yeah, this was an 82 response to, if you have a no trade list, what's the first team on it? Winnipeg was number 1, 48%. And the Sabres were number 2 at 19.5%, which brings up 2 points for me. One, Winnipeg, same situation. Fantastic team. right?
Yeah.
So, spare me, I guess, this idea that nobody wants to come to Buffalo. The quotes, notably, there was nothing about palm trees, nothing about the weather, the snow, nothing. One guy did mention high taxes. High taxes. The organization hasn't been that strong recently. They haven't made the playoffs in like 14 years. In saying that, I have some friends there, and they love playing there. Another
That's
player
a
said
positive and a negative, right?
yeah, kind of.
Okay.
I would say, and then another guy said the way it's going there, Buffalo, it's just kind of mucky there forever. And for me right now in my career, I don't really need that. It's not going to help me. And another guy said all they do is lose.
So
But
those last two underscore the problem.
winning, right?
Yeah.
If they were winning, I don't know that the taxes. I'm sure the taxes wouldn't help you. It's not a selling point. The weather's not helping you. It's not a selling point. But I wonder. I think they would probably be, even if they were a playoff team, they'd be on some no trade lists, right?
Mhm.
Especially because, frankly, what happened the last 14 years is going to be hard to shake with just a couple playoff appearances. But just because of small market, bad weather, all that, I get that. But some of this also just, to me, underscored like how much is organizational versus location. And I think Kevin Adams spun a lot of it as location and some of it as winning. But the winning is just a small piece of the organizational reputation. It's maybe not a small piece, but it's only one piece, right? It's part of it. But your organizational reputation is multi-layered here, I think, as the Pagula comments in the agent survey. And then the other, maybe the most interesting part of this player poll, because we expected that part, right? We expected that Buffalo would be on the no trade and there would be some comments about Buffalo, just like Winnipeg expects it, I'm sure, every time these things come out. But what coach would you least like to play for? 93 responses. Lindy Ruff came in fifth, 6.15% of the responses. And the quote was, I just think, from one of the players, I just think he's too old. I don't think he understands the game anymore. That's what I hear from the guys that play for him, that he just doesn't know what's going on most of the time. Guys that play for him, I think it should be noted, that could be Buffalo or New Jersey. I don't know exactly. I wasn't the one who put that quote in there. I don't know where exactly that came from. It doesn't necessarily mean that guys on the current roster are, telling their peers around the league that Lindy doesn't know what's going on. I got, the sense when Lindy got fired in New Jersey that the players weren't too beat up about it. So it's quite possible that came from somebody in New Jersey, but still interesting, right? That the guy that was supposed to fix everything, the biggest offseason acquisition last summer, I would say,
VP of marketing.
the one they were selling the hardest leading
Yeah.
into the season, his reputation is not bulletproof at this point around the league, right? It's not, at least with the players. And I'm not sitting here saying that where they are right now is because of Lindy Ruff by any means, but worth storing in the back of your mind as we go into the offseason and ponder what kind of changes need to be made, that, he was supposed to be a big part of the fix. And right now they're worse than they were last.
Lindy was fifth on that list, and he's really fourth because one of the guys that was ahead of him doesn't even coach in the league right now, and that was Mike Babcock, who got 7.69% of the votes. So, yeah, I think that the Lindy thing is kind of relevant, and we've kind of hinted at it here and there in some comments. We haven't had a segment on it, but we're definitely gonna have to talk about Lindy and his future, and do we envision him next year? Let's see what happens in these final 24 games. Let's keep just a general vibe check out there on Lindy Ruff, and how he's managing this group. What's his posture post game, during practice, post practice, media availability and whatnot. I mentioned that I think he's tired, but no, I think you're right. Because like 6% roughly of 93, it's like what, maybe 8 guys. That's a lot of responses though, when it's the first name out of the mouth. Now, again, you have to take it with a grain of salt. Even the comment the one player that said, I just think he's too old, so that's a nice ageist comment. But like, that's what I hear from the guys that play for him, that he doesn't know. He just doesn't know what's going on most of the time. Like, that's kind of an asshole thing to say almost in a way about another human being. But like,
it's flippant,
but
right?
and you
It's
have to
just
take it with
kind
a
of
grain
like,
of salt. Yeah, you have to. So I do want to defend Lindy here. I don't want to do a pile on here, but it is relevant.
These are guys that are, answering anonymously. They know they're answering anonymously, and they're, but that gets you some interesting. It gets you closer to the truth in a lot of ways, sometimes. And there was some. It's a fun exercise, frankly. Really fun conversations to have. I forget the exact number of guys that I pulled for that, but we had a 2-parter this year, so good chunk of the Sabres, locker room represented in there. But it's you do get some certainly off the cuff answers. But I would say in particular with that question, it is noteworthy that his name pops up because there are some sort of reflexive names. I feel like, Torts, right? You're going to just kind of think like that guy's a hard ass. Although I kind of was like, Torts to me, like if you really don't want to play for Torts, like what does that say about you as if you don't know him, if you haven't had the experience in the past? But he's an easy one. And the fact that Babcock was, allowed to be included kind of, waters down the top of the results. And so, yeah, Lindy getting 8 of the, 100 something responses it's not nothing. It's not a one-off, right? It wasn't one grumpy guy that heard something and just threw it out there. So kind of interesting.
No, I thought it was damning when I was reading some of those things. And again, like, I think the Lindy one is the only one that's like, you really have to take it with a grain of salt. Could have been one player that got benched that's still playing in the league and just has an axe to grind with Lindy Ruff. But there were others that again, first name out of the mouth. This wasn't first, second, third. Each player gave one answer. Each agent gave one answer. And there really wasn't a ton of positivity there with Buffalo, even though one of the players said that his friends like playing here, despite losing as much as the Sabres have. That's something. But I think there's a reason for that, right?
I'm going to throw this up. Patrick Wolf, isn't the answer to all this a veteran GM who has clout with agents and other GMs, one who is better able to navigate through the perceived negatives? And another comment in here about,
I love that comment, by the way. I have a thought on that. Yeah.
Jim Soupy Campbell says Buffalo is 90 minutes from the main home of probably 25% of NHL players, Greater Toronto area. I really don't think Buffalo is not Winnipeg as far as remote. Like the winter is worse in Winnipeg. It's a more remote destination. Like I do feel like push comes to shove, if you removed all the other factors, like Buffalo is a better location than that. And I mean, we all know the positives. Greek had another comment in here about, the traffic in New York City. And, maybe the GM should focus on the restaurants, inexpensive real estate, thriving art scene, friendly people, no traffic. Like this may not be as dramatic a fix as it's, painted to be at times, right? Like it may not be this thing that needs to take 7-8 years of drafting and developing because nobody wants to come here. You got to trap these young guys on entry-level contracts and, build a winner that way. To an extent, you need to lean in that direction the way Winnipeg has. But to the original commenter's point, like an experienced GM who has clout, like I think the agent survey was actually somewhat encouraging in that Buffalo sort of just came up because they just lose, right? And the owner, they can't quite figure out what the hell's going on. Like, if he was engaged and there was an experienced GM, I think agents aren't necessarily avoiding this the same way. So it doesn't have to be as complicated, dramatic a fix as you would think. Like it's somewhat simple in a way.
Couple things, right? So yes, on all roads in these discussions lead back to if It's really about getting that experienced general manager in there. The Sabres organization, in the grand scheme of the NHL, understands. I'm sure they understand, but I think we're all better if we just understand and say we are what we are as an organization in this 32 team league. It's a Sabres organization that has limited resources. They have to make do with fewer bodies because of, I think, revenue generation. There's a lot of things in the business side, I think, that impact staffing levels and whatnot. You can only worry about the things that you can control. And for Terry Pegula, what he can control is who's running the show. All roads in this discussion lead back to the general manager position. And that's why I think for fans, you see it all the time, every week, especially since Christmas. It's like, is Kevin Adams the guy? You've said it. Is Kevin Adams the guy that can make trades? Is there confidence that he can sign Zucker and Greenway? Is he the guy that should be trading Dylan Cousins for someone or pursuing Elias Pettersson or whatever the case? All roads lead back to that. That's going to be a hot topic that you and I are going to be talking about once the season ends.
Constantly,
Yep.
probably up until the season ends, right? Because it's like there's a lot of questions about the roster, and they do all lead back in that direction. Because another topic I wanted to get to, and I think this is a natural place to bring it up.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I want to get back to that Grieg comment real quick. Can you throw that one back up? Do you have it? Here, I got it right here. I mentioned this before, but I wanted to say it again. I just didn't want to step on you. Okay, everything that he's saying here, and I'm going to read Grieg's comment again. It took me 3 hours to go 11 miles from LGA to JFK last month. That's LaGuardia to JFK. Maybe the GM should focus on the restaurants, inexpensive real estate, thriving art scene, the friendliest people. Right, there is a lot to sell with Buffalo. The Sabres PR staff should weaponize what's good about the area, the fact that players stay here after their playing days. You put together a package, you send it to every agent, you send it to the Players Association. You start to go on offense for once to try to market what is downtrodden. And it leads into the Pete Goelli thing. Yes. There's a segue there. Maybe that's where you were going, right?
That's exactly where I was going. Yes.
There's things that they can do instead of sitting back and letting the players and the agents somewhat pile on and try to dig yourself out of it. And again, control what you can control. What I was just saying about Terry Pegula can control. There's one thing that he can control. It's installing someone else in the corner office. If it's not Kevin Adams, if he's not getting the job done. But I wanted to say that again. We mentioned it maybe in a passing comment a couple episodes ago. I really believe that from a business strategy, that's what you have to do. And some people say, oh, that's hokey, or like maybe like agents will like front, like, yeah, here's Buffalo. Well, at least you're trying. Because I guarantee they haven't done it before.
Well, and I think
and you can't word of mouth. You have to take control of that. Sorry, go ahead, man. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, part of it, the word of mouth point is a good one, right? You can't just say like, look, we have Alex Tuch. A lot of people in the league like Alex Tuch. Alex Tuch can spread the good word about this organization. Or Kyle Okposo, we treated him right on the way out the door. He's highly respected. He'll spread the good word about this organization. At the very least, if you do what you're talking about and go on offense, on the outside, I'm thinking that's an organization, a franchise that has some pride in what they're doing, has some pride in the area, the history of the franchise, and the future, what it looks like. That is important. Like that was my biggest issue with December, was like the lack of pride shown for this area, right? And the community, and like fans get piled on by these anonymous polls. I don't think fans dislike it necessarily, right? They're like, they want to hear this unfiltered, take on their team, but they don't need additional, from within the walls, right? So certainly not from the most, important decision maker on the hockey side of things. So I think that's a good point by you. And there's also things that you can do strategically, right? Soupy mentioned 25% of the league. Those aren't probably exact figures, but a good chunk of the league is from Toronto, Southern Ontario, Ontario in general, right? You could do Ontario, you could do expand it out, right? Like focus on like attracting players that have some geographic reason to want to come to Buffalo and stay in Buffalo. Like, try some sort of next level strategic thinking, proactive thinking to that extent. But what will be interesting in the next month and a half ish until the end of the season. You brought up the letter that went out to season ticket holders on Thursday before the Carolina game. There was a big chunk in there, and I wrote about this in a column on Friday at The Athletic if people want to go find it. But, I put in big chunks of the letter in that column, particularly the stuff about on ice. Pete Goelli is the one who signed the letter, so we'll say he wrote it, even though I'm sure these things are not written by one person most of the time. But the big chunk in the on ice section that kind of struck me was that as an organization, quote, as an organization, we remain steadfast in our belief that we need to build for long-term success. We believe in the vision and feel we are right on the doorstep of where we want to go. First of all, I would have scrapped that. You're not on the doorstep of anything. You're in last place.
Let's redline this.
Right? It took some time at the start of the season to adjust to a new system. But as the year has gone on, the players have adapted well to the schemes Lindy has put in place. Sure. There's some truth there, right? But New Jersey seems to be adapting a lot better and a lot quicker to its new system. And that's where Lindy was. Other teams with new coaches didn't take until January to start putting it together. Our scoring has improved significantly, currently leading the league in first period goals and with overall 5-on-5 scoring being amongst the top of the league.
Okay, everyone get ready for this next one.
That is true. They're second in the league on 5-on-5 goals per 60, so no issues there. The penalty kill has taken massive steps, and we are winning at home. They are an average team at home, 17th in the league, I think, in points percentage. And the penalty kill's 20th in the league. The final line here is in the on-ice portion. Young players have continued to flourish. While still showing consistent signs of growth, and our offseason acquisitions are contributing in significant ways. And the top of it did start off with organizationally, this is an area we want to see improve as much as you, even with our strong play as late. We know you are disappointed in the way the season has unfolded overall, and so are we. The Pagulas are completely committed to the franchise and will do and invest in whatever it takes to develop a team that you're proud of. And then that's when, the talk about the doorstep was thrown in there.
So the end goal, by the way, Matt, was to get season ticket renewals without an increase. Correct?
Yes. March 17th, if you renew by March 17th, you won't have an increase, which implies that if you don't, you will. Now, I will also, there's also a concession discount that you get if you're a season ticket holder, and they're going to put up some value menu or something. So other little nuggets in there. And they also highlighted how well Rochester's doing this year. Even though I don't know that there's much in Rochester that's helping the team next season. But maybe Devin Levi. They are trying to get people to renew by March 17th. What interests me about that, I don't know that I'd put a deadline on it, in good faith to the fan base, right? What is all anybody's going to see is the deadline. The deadline in 5 more games, right? They don't get to see what happens at the end of the season. They don't get to see what happens in the offseason, what trades get made. Does Kevin Adams stay? Does Lindy Ruff stay? That might be people might want Lindy Ruff to stay, right? But we don't know. Where's Lindy Ruff at? He just turned 65. I did, you mentioned the fan survey is up at The Athletic, gauging a variety, just kind of getting the temperature of the fan base on a variety of topics. And some of the questions were open-ended, and I really appreciate the people that took time to submit written feedback on, different things. And a big point that a lot of people may. I mean, there's a lot of people frustrated, obviously, with the general manager. The investment end of things like that. And to me, if you're trying to sell people, you're not giving them a full picture, and you're making your most loyal customers, like you're drawing this line in the sand at March 17th. Maybe they'll be out of last place by then. Like
the timing of it was really good. They had won what 5 of 6 when that came out, and
6 of
so that was
7. I
also
think they had just beat the Ducks.
6 of 7. Yeah,
They won 8-2
7.
coming out of the break. The Four Nations might have got people fired up about hockey. The Sabres played a couple good games. That's good timing. Then they lay an egg on Thursday night, and they lose to the Canadiens here. Now 0-3 on the season against the Canadiens. The deadline will be a big piece of this, but I don't know if that's necessarily, how people are making their decisions. I'm sure a lot of people have already made up their mind, but you draw that hard line in the sand. And I did put in my column some comparisons to a similar Pegula letter 7 years ago, 2018. Terry Pegula signed the letter, which, I think does matter, right? Especially when, like I said, I don't think, this is a one-person job writing this letter. Putting Terry's name on it, I don't know. Seems like simple. The fact that it's, I don't know. That's just me. But his one in 2018, I was reading it and I was like, yeah, this is the type of stuff you should say. He was like, we're not as far along in this as we should be. I'm not going to rehash the mistakes that were made or make excuses, but I'm telling you that our standard needs to be higher. None of this is good enough. I know it's just words, and we need to back it up, all of this. And I just liked the tone so much better. And that was, the drought's twice as long. Kevin Adams spoke about needing to raise the standard, right? That was the buzz phrase at the beginning of the year. Accountability was the buzz phrase at the end of last year. And it was win now, right? This was a win now situation. They were ready to take the next step. The year before that, the window was open. This must be a very small window, Kris, because it was wide open 2 years ago, and they haven't even come close to going through it. But the messaging is all over the place, because now it's like, well, look at this team we have in Rochester and this 20th ranked penalty kill and, this convoluted chunk of stats that it's like, what are if you're talking about raising the standard and you're going to spend that much real estate in this letter trying to spin what's happened on the ice as promising, that's what it felt like, right? That look at all this promising stuff that's happening. Like, your goals against is really lousy. The flip side of that first period stat is that you're blowing leads at a ridiculous rate. Everybody, that bought season tickets was treated to that display against the New Jersey Devils when Stefan Nason took some liberties with Tage Thompson and skated away no worse for the wear. Like, of course, they're not going to put all that in this letter, right? But it's like, when you put the other stuff in there, you kind of open yourself up to that. Instead of being the way Terry was 7 years ago, just saying this is not good enough. Like, this is, the amount of real estate dedicated to the fact that it was disappointing compared to all these promising things. I mean, you have to sell something, and this is a hard product to sell. I just think the audience here does not want to be sold on that at this point.
No, they just want the team to win. I think you're going to see that reflected in your fan survey results that come in. I think on that letter, I think just from a business perspective, I think a little more accountability could have been baked into that, and a little more transparency. And that's part of the accountability. I think that in the same point in time, I agree with you. I think Terry Pegula, his letter in 2018, I think you said it was definitely more effective, more transparent, and had more accountability baked into it. I have seen the reaction from the fans to this one, And yeah, I mean, I don't know what they could have done though. I mean, I don't have an answer there. Like, I'm not a PR guy. I just know, like, in business, when things aren't going great, I feel the need to be more accountable with my customers, my key stakeholders at suppliers and things like that. And
Transparency is disarming in a
yeah,
lot of
no,
ways.
100%,
Right.
100% is. That's why I think you do it, because you're just being real about it. And you're saying, here's the state of things. But like, I don't know what he was, what I struggle with is trying to figure out how the accountability or transparency could have been written in, like the right phrasing and where to put it in the letter. Because where you put it, I think it's first and foremost, you got to kind of put it right at the top before you start selling this other stuff. But that's what I would have been looking for here. And just, I think I need a little more time to think about how I'd almost like to write my version of it to fans. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Honestly, and like, here's how I would do it. But that's my angle of attack anyways. I'm not going to spin my tires on it right now and think on the fly, because that's dangerous. But yeah, like, here's the thing, man. When they went through the tank, the Sabres sent out like their season ticket package was based on the #1 prospect ranking in the NHL. It's 10 years ago, man.
Yeah.
And they're kind of doing it here with their look towards the future again. And is it because they don't have a choice to? I don't know. Again, I got to think about it, but it's just, we're stuck in time, man. You know, it's like when there's patients, you know, my brother used to work with an organization. They would, like, there's some, like, people that had brain injuries, significant brain injuries when they were 18. Now they're like 40, 50-year-old men, and they're stuck at that time when they had their, that's kind of how this fan base is. They're stuck in the tank. Like this, you know what I mean? Like,
they're
still being sold hope.
They're on a hamster wheel, right? Like,
And that was a horrible, I'm going to call myself out on that. That was a horrible analogy, but that's kind of how I feel. It's like a significant event happened and you haven't escaped it. I don't want to suggest that we've had a collective brain injury. That's not what I'm saying. Of course,
right. But
Jesus.
the like, you're 14 years into a playoff drought, selling hope, selling the future. And I think people really just want honesty and transparency, and they probably want to hear it directly from Terry, in a sense. And, you know, you're not going to satisfy. This fan base is very angry, right? You're not going to satisfy them with transparency, but you're also not going to piss them off further. If it's so. Sun has a comment here: as a season ticket holder, I will not be renewing. Pete's little fear tactic was the last straw for me.
You know,
so imagine that, right? I mean, like, these letters can do, I don't think these letters are selling tickets, but they can do damage. And I feel like it's possible that this one did. Like, if I'm reading that as somebody who paid thousands of dollars for season tickets, I'm thinking, holy smokes. Like, I've watched all these. You're sending this to season ticket holders. Like, I'm at these games. Like,
what if they said, Matt, what if they said, like, you know, like, again, the accountability, the transparency, we realize that we have not built the roster and used the salary cap to our full advantage. Moving forward, we are going to make every attempt to spend to the salary cap and improve our roster and improve the on ice product.
If they
to give you, the fans, a better,
yeah.
Like, what if they said that? Would that have changed things? It would open some eyes. There's still some people that would be skeptical about it.
Well, people would be angry because it would be confirmation or an admission that they haven't done that. But
that's the accountability and the transparency.
You could also spin it as, hey, we had a young roster. We thought, we didn't necessarily need to spend, and we could kick the can down the road. But now we recognize, in this rising cap environment, we need to compete, and we plan to do so by spending every dollar possible on and off the ice. Right? Like, that.
It doesn't have to be the Dead Sea Scrolls here,
no, yeah.
Like, there's a way to, like, concisely say, you know what, we're prepared to do what it takes. And if it takes spending to the cap, we will do that. Because Kevin has actually said in the past that that's not an issue, right? So why not say it here? I know it's kind of like, far-fetched maybe to put something like that in there, but I bet you it would have been eye-opening for some fans that are very disappointed, especially the sharp fan that knows that they haven't spent in 5 years.
This is what it comes down to. I mean, Sideshow Bob 32. I don't care about transparency. I just want a hockey team that wins more games than it loses. And that was the overwhelming, thing when I asked people in the survey, like, what would make you come to more games or, whatever. It's like, just win. Like, what would make the arena experience better? Just win. Right. I mean, and that would solve so many problems for them. But I think what's adding to the frustration for fans is that they're not spending to the salary cap, and that there's this perceived, they say that the Pagulas are willing to invest whatever and totally committed and doing whatever, but it doesn't feel that way to the fans when you don't spend to the salary cap, when you don't run a GM search and you hire a guy that has never done it or never really done a job super close to that one. It starts to feel that way to people, that you're not as invested. So the winning, of course, is the bottom line, right?
Anthony
I recognize
has been
that.
on fire in the chat, by the way. So I wanted to throw in his up. I think on that messaging, like what could they put in there? And, again, it might be a bad idea. Like you'd have to kind of sit back and think about how you frame it. But Anthony S says if they were going to do that, they'd say it. And I believe Anthony S is referring to spending more to improve the roster. The fact that they won't say that speaks volumes. That is the caveat, right? Just because Kevin has said it in the past that he doesn't have any restrictions doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. Actions speak louder than words.
Actions are everything, right? Actions are,
so
in that regard, it's everything, because
I get it.
What competitive reason do you have in a frozen cap league to not be closer to the ceiling than they've been, right?
Yeah.
Like,
that's why it's like make every attempt,
Right.
every attempt. It's not a guarantee that we're going to do. We're going to make every attempt.
And the cap's going up, right? We've talked about the haves and the have-nots potentially emerging in this rising cap landscape in the NHL. So it will continue to be a point of focus. And, this is a long road we've traveled away from, the trade deadline, but this is what they're kind of selling. And, the question I posed in my column is who's buying? Who's buying this hope that is being sold? And we've talked about it or alluded to it on previous shows. Like, what do you sell? And I do think you can sell. I know wins is really the ultimate thing that you can sell. But look at last summer. They sold Lindy, right? You can sell something. Can you really possibly sell the status quo? Because there was a lot of patience being preached in that letter to me. And
the bigger problem might be the deadline on that, right? Than the messaging. I think the deadline might be the bigger problem. I think all in the big picture, the season ticket renewal deadline. The more that I think about it, the letter's a letter, right?
Greg says the increase post March 17th for him is 20% higher than the early bird discount, which is basically just a price freeze. That's another PR disaster if it's replicated throughout the arena after this season's results. Like 20% is a nice hike. Season tickets aren't cheap. The price freeze, you're speaking to your most dedicated, like anybody who has season tickets right now is like dedicated, right? You don't want to lose those people. And it feels like you kind of ran the risk of doing that.
So, okay. Yeah. We're an hour 8 in, by the way.
It's also like 2 weeks. Right.
I know. That's what I'm saying. Like there's that's a problem, I think, for digesting, you know what I mean? Yeah. I think that underscores that's kind of the big issue, I think, is the deadline, not so much the messaging in there. I'm not going to pile on Pico Elliott too much here. You know what I mean? He's got a tough job. He definitely has a tough job.
It's
right?
a tough product to sell.
It's a tough product to sell, but it is what it is, right? And we have to talk about
Russ Brandon in the middle of the Bills drought, right?
Like, yeah.
You
but
become an expert in selling hope. Got to sell something.
But he also he's also got a nice COO salary, and he's got to kind of figure it out. And we'll see.
It's also hard to make trades, right? We hear that a lot. It's hard to make trades. It's hard to get guys to sign in Buffalo. These jobs, they're very hard. We should underscore that in every episode.
Let's
a lot harder than sitting here and doing a podcast.
So we are almost an hour and 10 minutes in. If you could please hit the like button if you haven't already. We're going to keep going here for a little bit. There's a couple other things I want to talk to Matthew about before we get him on the road to go back home to his lovely family and get him in his PJs. And, you're going to be a busy man, Matthew, leading up to the deadline. A couple things, right? It's like kind of going back to, how do you improve the team and the deadline, go out and, I think we should talk a little bit more about possible trades, whether it's at the deadline or after free agency. We're going to start building our free agency list like we did last year. That's going to be a fun one. We got plenty of runway to do that. You said something earlier that I want to go back to about kind of the geography. We've talked about it last year in free agency, getting guys that maybe have some familiarity with the region, whether it's the Niagara region, Southern Ontario, whatever. You want to make some noise, and did the Sabres have the yam bag to make a big offer for a Mitch Marner? That's one of those guys, right? And you get
JMP
that.
says, everybody just relax.
He put it right there. I didn't even see I didn't even see that comment. Honestly, that's really
funny. This has all been part of the long play. They knew that Marner would be a free agent in 2025, and they saved their money and lined everything up just right. They could bring him in. Big Bills fan, right? Mitch Marner.
That's what I'm saying, man.
He comes to Bills games, I guess. But
it's really silly, but it's relevant.
Well, we're going to have some fun, I think, once we get through the deadline, these sort of pressing situations with Greenway, Zucker, and Jokijarju. I think the conversation immediately turns after that to how do you fix this? And so, what sort of stuff do you do? We didn't really get to Peterka tonight. That was a rumor that was out there that they're getting calls on him. Frank Saravelli had that report. I think that's probably a longer conversation for another episode. Not an idea that you and I think is super crazy.
Nope.
And so maybe that's a good tease for the next show. But I think talking about guys like that is something that strikes me as post-deadline. If there's been so little urgency to get this other stuff done, why should I believe that there's going to be urgency to make some earth-shattering, roster-altering type of trade before the summer when the market will open up more, the cap will go up? You're trading with the entire league at that point. So that's where I'm at on those guys.
Yeah, let's get the easier ones done first before we have the bigger picture, franchise altering conversations. I agree with you on that. Cap going up, by the way, I think it actually makes the job harder for Kevin Adams if he's the general manager of the team, because some of the problem contracts that may exist under the current cap conditions may not be as much of a problem for some of the teams holding those contracts when the cap does go up next year. Something to think about. Want to clear out some chats. I've started a few. I don't know if you threw any in there, but we'll just kind of go through in the order that they came in. If that works for you, Matthew. Again, hit that like button. We'll go to Jeff Luce. This was from earlier in the evening. He says, I'm really to the point that I'm wanting Brian Burke to be the GM. It's the one thing they haven't tried, which is someone in that spot that has a track record of success. And he does. He's very direct, very blunt. I think the Brian Burke dynamic with Terry Pagula would be pretty wild. Just for that dynamic itself, I just would love to see it. Or would we even see it, right? Because Terry Pagula is just kind of in the background a little bit. That's kind of how he functions as the owner of this franchise, at least in the present term. But Burke, yeah, I don't know. I think that's a conversation. He doesn't have a job right now, right? He's still kind of active. So just food for thought. I think that he would be on a list that we could certainly talk about as the season winds down, because Matthew and I will have we'll have plenty of things to discuss when the season winds down. Kind of interesting and different. Mike Lipinski says a team needs truculence. That's actually a Brian Burke word, 100%. And by the way, this is also another plug for the Athletic Sabres fan survey. There's some things there was one question there. It's like, what do you want to see more of in the team? Truculence wasn't the word used, but there is, I think, team toughness was one of the options in there. I wouldn't be surprised. I'm curious to see where that rates. I don't know how you guys are going to present the data, but
It's a
are they
pie
going to be?
chart, and it
Is
is
it okay?
that was probably the most evenly split of the
Interesting.
results. We've got over 1,200 responses right now, and that one is probably the most evenly split of. There was a lot of write-ins. I love the people that just like write in. You know, it's like I gave what I thought were like 4 or 5 pretty good options. Like I'm talking about the roster, and people are like, sell the team, new GM. You know,
Yeah.
it's like, oh, we're getting a little off topic here. This is going to mess up my pie chart and my results, but that's okay.
Yeah. You'll just have an other, right? Or write in.
Yeah,
Like,
there's
yeah.
like an other section of the
And
pie
it'll be
chart.
60%. Yeah. Right. Stephen Cantor, friend of the show, avid skier, writes in Noah Ostlund is on fire, by the way. He is, actually. He is. And just real quick, one floor elevator on what Ostlund's been doing. And I'll cover this on Prospect Avenue. I think I'm going to cut one up tomorrow. 20 points in his last 19 games, goals in 3 straight, back-to-back shootout goals, real nice, same move, backhand, kind of that Casey Middlestat move. Coming along really nicely. Came into the season a shade over 170 pounds. I don't know if he can get to 185, but I think that that's kind of the number that you'd like to see a player like that get to. But man, 200-foot player, smart off the puck, really gifted playmaker, looking really good. In those 19 games, by the way, he's been with Isak Rosén at even strength at all 19 of those games. They've had a little revolving door at wing opposite Ostlund, Brett Murray, Lucas Rusak, Riley Fidler-Schultz, Wahlberg played 4 games or so. But that whole Noah Ostlund, Isak Rosén dynamic is kind of becoming really interesting. Something to watch. Not that Pete Guelli should have put that in there. Noah Ostlund, Isak Rosén, the Swedes paired up, looking good. But no, I just wanted to kind of give a shout out to Noah Ostlund because he's been excellent coming off some injury woes to start his year. Jeff Epsteiner. Owen Power is bad, to put it very lightly. I want to take this conversation in a different way. I think Owen Power's been really good lately. He's playing bigger.
I'm liking what I'm
physical,
seeing. He's a little
taking
bit more
charge,
engaged. He's
more
still making
urgency.
mistakes. He's
Yep.
making mistakes, but I think he's definitely more engaged physically. He's more, urgency is probably a good way to put it. He's not quite truculent yet, but he's getting there. He's producing. I'm not as down on Owen Power, even as I was at maybe the beginning of the year. So I really didn't like him at the beginning of the year, but I feel like he's starting to look like he's on the right path.
His game is growing, but it doesn't mean that he can't be moved if you're going to sell players at the right value, optimal value. Okay. And that's future episode. Again, I think a little teaser piece. Neil Kennington says, so how does everyone feel about Elias Pettersson now? No thanks to him and his pissy mood and his brutal contract, $11.6 million for 7 more years. I have a different take, man. I think if you can make that deal, you take the gamble. You take the gamble. And as time goes
on, keep going down, right?
The price will keep going down. As time goes on, the price maybe does go down. Because if you're Vancouver and you're in that market and you can attract talent, you don't have the problems that Buffalo GM has already admitted that maybe he has, just in the perception and what we talked about earlier in these surveys. Vancouver's a destination market. They could use that space and go out and reshape their top 6 or their top line. They have the benefit of that. Buffalo doesn't. If you can get a player like that, you take the gamble. You see if a change of scenery works. I know it's a lot of money, man. I know it's a lot of term. You take the gamble. That's where I'm at with Pettersson. Czech could agree or disagree. That's where I'm at in the present moment. Matthew, you got thoughts on that? Am I wrong?
Yeah, it depends on the deal for me. I do think there's some caution flags going up with that player at this point. It's been a long time. This is a 12-month problem, really, maybe even a little bit longer.
Mm-hmm.
You wonder about injury. You wonder about what exactly is going on. So it's not a make the move at all costs for me, but it is definitely you keep your finger on the pulse of that situation, because if the value starts to look right, then It's a gamble worth taking. 11.6 million is a lot of money. The cap's going up, and the Sabres have cap space. So I'm not overly concerned about that, and it would solve really a major issue on their roster for a number one center. And I don't know, if you get him right, that's a 100-point player. It's people were probably treading lightly on Jack Eichel at one point, and that turned out okay well, not for Buffalo, but
looking pretty good for Vegas. I think that the whole thing too, we did a whole, lengthy, it was mostly the majority of an episode a month ago on Pettersson. And I mean, I know I acknowledge, I think you did too. He's not exactly like the exact player type that you need, but he does have that star potential. You've seen it before, and you're not going to fill every hole with what you need in one move. Conceptually, though, again, I've answered the question that I would still pursue it. It's all based on cost, right? It's the right deal. I'm not talking about the 11.6. I'm talking about what you got to give up to get him. Brian Cummings, Chicago ate 2.5 a year for 5 years to shed Seth Jones. They got Spencer Knight and a first in return, too. It's a great deal for Chicago. Fantastic deal for Chicago. Fantastic deal for Chicago, and probably a pretty good deal for Florida, too.
Pretty good piece of business. A hard day of work at the office for those GMs. That seemed like a tough trade to make.
What do you got? You got anything? I've been kind of cruising through what I had started. I don't know if you have anything cooked up.
I think I was pulling most of mine up right in real time as we were going. So
let me cruise through the other ones that I threw up because they're just kind of quick hits at this point. Kevin Kazuda says, aren't the Rangers and Islanders in the same tax state? Yes. They're also adjacent to, very fun major metropolitan area. Players' wives, I think, would enjoy the shopping in New York and so on. But no, taxes? I know you're asking just about taxes. Yes, they are. To answer the question. So it's a good call up by Kevin. Go back to Jeff Luce here. If agents think the Sabres are poorly run, just strengthens my belief that Brian Burke is the right answer for GM. No, I get it. Again, I think there's some structure. There's been there, done that. I always say get some players that have been there, done that. And if Terry Pegula makes judgment on that change is needed, again, with like one of the things, like the only thing that he really controls, a seasoned guy with the resume of a Brian Burke, I think does kind of compel. We'll say it that. And then Jeff Luce again. I didn't know I was doing this, but Jeff Luce, I guess you're the chatter of the night. When the Amherst clinch a playoff spot, would you bring up Oslin, Wahlberg, Rosane, and Levi and let them play out the string to see if they're ready for the NHL in 2025-26? No.
No, I think you keep them there, right? Let them.
Yeah. Now, again, depends. Like not play out the string. If you want to throw them a couple games here and there, if it works out for the schedule, maybe. Brett Murray has been sitting there. He's got an NHL contract. I don't think he's a long-term NHL player by any means, but he's a guy who's going to pop in 30 goals likely this year. And, you could reward him for being a good soldier and a good leader and give him some NHL game checks. There's a couple different ways, a couple levers you can pull if you're looking to plug some guys. I am a believer, though, in bringing young guys up and giving them a taste, especially at the end of the season, maybe that last week of the season where you're not pulling them away from Rochester too long. We have to remember winning in Rochester still is very important for the group. You have some guys down there that will be NHLers, possibly, though, and likely not next year. And they're still in first place in the entire AHL. Keep it moving. Keep it rolling. Just keep the good things going down there. It's not about, I don't think that Buffalo's a toxic environment or anything like that. But I just think that you have this good group. They're really gelling down there. Don't disrupt the rhythm and keep that Amerks team riding high going in the playoffs. The fact that they enter March in first place in the entire AHL, pretty cool. Pretty cool. That's all I had starred.
It's probably a good place to cut it.
Yeah, we're a $1.24 in. Hey, I really appreciate
midnight.
Everyone hopping in tonight. Is it past midnight? Oh wow. Okay. Yeah. Let's get out of here. I'm gonna start dreaming of breakfast pretty soon. I'm starving now. I'm not gonna eat tonight though. But at any rate, Matthew, plugs, closing thoughts. What do you got cooking? You already filed. Is there anything for the folks to read at theathletic.com/Sabres by you tomorrow?
There should be. theathletic.com/Sabres is where you can find me. A couple people in here, my final plug, you can go take the fan survey over there if you subscribe to The Athletic. And there's a few people in here that have mentioned they're season ticket holders or that they may were not renewing, but feel free to reach out. I'd be interested in kind of hearing your experience for some stuff I'm working on. You can find my emails, mfairburn@theathletic.com. Or you can find me on X or Blue Sky. I think my DMs are open there on both of those. So I'd be interested in hearing, kind of from real people on, what exactly, what keeps you coming back, or maybe what's not, what you're not buying here, I guess. What has you finally pulling the plug?
Yes. Yeah. No, good. I'm glad you gave your email address out. When is that survey? When's the last day to get that filled out for anyone that hasn't done that?
I'll probably keep it open through the weekend, maybe through Monday, because I posted it on Thursday. So maybe through Monday. I'll give it an extra day it seems like the responses are leveling out as far as how quickly they're coming in. So, but yeah, I'll leave it open a little while longer.
Okay. Few other quick ones real quick, because it's a player that I like. Trade Zucker to the Red Wings for Nate Danielson. Man, Nate Danielson is like a Steve Yzerman type of player. I do like him, though, in terms of like a leader, Western League product from a couple drafts ago. Good player. I just think that he's like that heart and soul guy. Danielson certainly fits into your organization if you move off of like a Dylan Cousins, for example. It's kind of like the Porter Martone thing, in a way. Like you get a Martone, and he becomes more important to your future if a Cousins doesn't come around and you're not going to see it through with him or whatever. And then Epsteiner, when we were talking on the Owen Power piece, he chimes in with defenseman Denton Matejchuk from Columbus had a great goal today. Haven't seen it yet, Jeff, but he is 20 years old, doesn't play terribly and turn the puck over like Power. Denton Matejchuk is like a fourth forward out there, man. He gets the puck, he'll go end to end, adds a really good layer to the attack. I like Matejchuk, a little bit of that rover type. That we saw from, like, you still see a lot from Owen Power, so I get kind of where he's going with that. But again, I just think, Power's kind of moving in a good direction. It's not horrible, but also doesn't mean that he's exempt from trade discussions. I'm going to leave it at that. There's a lot of chats coming in. Sorry, I can't get to all of them on behalf of Matthew as well. We're going to wrap this up because we're closing in here on an hour and a half, but we appreciate everyone coming in tonight on our March 1st, 2025 edition of the Baker Fairburn Hockey Show. Sabres again losing 4-2 tonight, but it's never about the game. We're trying to keep it big picture with this team, talk about the future, what they need to do to, differently, how they're going to get themselves out of this decade plus futility, frankly. And it looks like we're in store for another year of that. So it's unfortunate, but we're committed to trying to figure it out for the rest of the season and beyond. So for Matthew Fairburn from The Athletic, for the production crew who definitely wants me to get off and take my dogs for a walk before bed, I'm Kris Baker. Appreciate everyone hopping in here tonight. Hit that like button on your way out, and we'll see you again next time.